Welcome to this special on why nobody feels confident anymore. So, who am I? I'm Mario Leone, and welcome to the Voices of Victory channel. We're going to unpack this topic today. Confidence used to mean that people were actually certain in themselves, or solid in what they believed, or solid in their identity. And now it has gone in a completely different direction. Everybody thinks that it's about performance and outcomes. And it's really not. Not at all. People don't want to feel good anymore. They just want to control how they look. They want to control how they look confident, how they sound confident, and be perceived and understood as confident. And those things are not the same thing. And somewhere along the way, us as humanity have lost our way. We've become disconnected from ourselves. Confidence became a public idea once social media rolled up on the scene. So you're no longer just competing against people in your town like it was maybe 50 years ago. You're actually competing against the lives of millions of people, which, by the way, most of their lives are edited. It's an edited truth, edited version. It is a watered down social media version. I think what tends to happen is people will go out on a limb. So they'll be in a tree. Let me go to the edge of the tree to show people that I'm fearless. And even though that branch is going to break, and they go out on a limb that far. And the bottom line is these are all prepared opinions. And some of these moments in life were never meant to be prepared. They were never meant to be brought to the surface. So people started to get totally confused with being visible out in the world and actual value, the value that they bring to the world. And then we got the most obnoxious person in the room, right? The most obnoxious, loudest person became the one that is perceived as most confident. And someone will say, oh, well, he's an alpha. Oh, he's an alpha. He's an alpha. She's an alpha. Meanwhile, when we look at the studies of how the alpha went down, it was a flawed experiment. And that word has really stuck to us in society in such a bad way. And I'm here to tell you that we're going to take a different angle on this because attention and getting attention from other people doesn't constitute that they actually have authority. And the fastest answer, the person who can have the fastest answer gets perceived as being the most intelligent, not realizing that there are many different types of intelligence. Emotional intelligence. Then we have relational intelligence. Then we have creative intelligence. So you can't just be quote unquote boxed, labeled as a intellectual, because quite honestly, there's more than one type of intellectual capacity. So people don't trust themselves, and you can see it. You can see it in a conversation. People explain too much. They either are backing off with their speech or they speak way too much. They apologize constantly before making a point or speaking, and then they add these little disclaimers to things. And you know what it does? It just overqualifies everything. It's overqualifying everyone's opinion at the end of the day. So it's not because we should look at them as weak people or not capable or don't have the capacity. It's because they think confidence is something that you earn after being perfect, or you earn based on how you're actually perceived. Perfectionism in itself has a connection, a direct connection to wanting to be perceived a certain way. And by the way, I talk about that in my book, The Beautiful Flaw, which you can find on Amazon. You can find it on my main channel. The real confidence, in the way that I know it, has never worked like that. All right, confidence is not always about being solid about everything, because there's going to be times where it's like, you know what? I just don't know. And that's okay, but we're going to figure it out together. And it's being able to be transparent and real like that. It's speaking before knowing if everybody agrees, because not everyone is going to agree. It is being present, emotionally grounded while being misunderstood. People are going to misunderstand you. They're going to try, at least. not everybody is going to understand you. And there are people that don't want to take the time out to know you, and they will deliberately misunderstand you. Let's get that very clear. And it's not because you're a smaller person or because of any other reason, but we could look at just social media is all about acquiring an audience and getting the audience bigger. And the question isn't the idea of, all right, how could I be more confident? I need to be more confident. Maybe we should look at it in a different way. Maybe we should take a total different point of view and start asking the question of, when did we start performing like a circus seal instead of actually expressing ourselves the way we are? And I think that's where it gets interesting. Confidence doesn't have to announce itself. Let's get very clear. And some people will take their intelligence and use it to mask their insecurity, all in the name, of course, sounding intelligent. And now, when we go down to the next topic in the whole list here, we have judgment, fear of judgment, authority, and of course, like, why we have to constantly over-explain. We are over-explained as a culture. And a lot of people think that confidence just totally disappears when people judge them, right? And that's not what happens, not at all. A lot of people judge themselves harshly. The same lens in which you judge yourself is the same lens in which you judge other people. So because we live in a comparison culture, if you judge 70 people in the daytime, chances are you're developing your inner judgment qualities, and you will judge yourself at 2 a.m. So here's the deal. People will speak. And before speaking, they will actually take the time to sit there and think. Or they'll talk over you, right? So when we look at it all, people stop noticing something. That no one is actually stopping them. No one is actually saying, hey, what are you doing here? Because some of them are carrying this invisible audience that they believe is following them around, or they have an entourage in some way, shape, or form, like a list of 10 people that they actually know. So they get this audience that's either invisible or visible, and you start wondering, do I start it right here and tell everybody who I am? Do I sound smart enough? Do I seem like I'm a qualified person? Are people going to misunderstand me? I don't want them to misunderstand me. There's nothing wrong with being clear when you speak to people. There's nothing wrong with being clear with your communication. But when people start worrying about them being misunderstood, they don't realize that if people do misunderstand you, that some people deliberately will misunderstand you. And outside of that, maybe they misunderstand you on the surface because they really didn't take the time to actually get to know and connect to the real you. When you start asking questions like, are they going to misunderstand me? Will I look arrogant? Am I going to look weak here? And if something strange happens, this all looks bad. And your nervous system gets under threat. And that's why people start, flip-flopping like a house of pancakes. So they stop speaking naturally. They start speaking on the defensive all the time. They get defensive about everything. And what happens is they don't realize that they're, having triggers. You could call it triggers or you could call it activation. Somehow there was something in them that got activated. And you know what? They start to see it everywhere. They see that defensiveness everywhere as well. People will over-explain their simple decisions, these everyday mundane decisions, and they'll put all these disclaimers before their actual opinion. And that's the thing, they turn every single sentence in, they hold court in their head and have a courtroom argument. And it's not because they're trying to really communicate to it all, but what they are trying to do is they're trying to avoid being rejected. They're hiding from rejection. And people are going to reject you in this world. That's the thing. They are. There's going to be people that do. Your vibe is your tribe. That's why I look at it. It's like your vibe is your tribe. And there's going to be people that are not your tribe. They're not your vibe. And it's going to be like that. But should you stop expressing yourself? Should you water yourself down? I don't believe so. I really don't. Confidence was never supposed to protect you from judgment. It was supposed to allow you to stand tall while you got judged. And it's not easy. It's painful. Right? Confidence is supposed to make that judgment survivable, like you could actually get through it and understand it. And that's where the authority gets confused in the whole thing. People think authority is just the absence of the criticism. And there's more to it, because authority is about being grounded, staying confident in who you are, trusting yourself while the criticism actually exists. But we don't do that. What do? We take criticism, we attach it to our identity. I used to do this. I don't do this anymore. So I'm a writer, and if I wrote a screenplay back in the day, I would say, someone would critique it and say, oh, that script sucks. And I would take that and say, okay, sucky script, sucky screenplay equals sucky writer. You make that equation because you attach that to your work, not realizing it's the opinion of one person, not 70. And you have to question where that feedback is actually coming from. Is this person even equipped to speak and give criticism in that way? Are they someone who works in Hollywood and it's got Oscar awards? Or is this just a run-of-the-mill person? And you have to consider where the criticism is coming from. And you have to be able to filter out the bullshit and filter in what's valuable. Now, keep in mind, some of the bullshit can actually have value. So yes, you do have to learn to sift through the negative and see if there's any value in there. And it will show. And you have to train your mind to do that. So when we have that concept of attention says, look at me, where authority starts to say, this is me, this is who I am, this is what I think, take it or leave it. So that's where it gets interesting, because it comes down to approval, seeking that self-approval, and that's where it can be a slippery slope. Authority tolerates disapproval. That's why some people think that they can speak really quietly like this and somehow still fill the room. And that's why some people feel that they have to yell and scream and dominate every conversation and speak so loud and still feel clueless about what it is they believe. Confidence really isn't about being viewed. It's not about that. It actually comes from you standing in your own identity, standing in your own power, and not blending into the bushes where you are. If you ever seen that picture, that little meme of Homer Simpson who just blends into the bushes as he falls backwards, that's what I mean. That's the visual. You don't want to just disappear into that crowd. The crowd is being chased more than people are leading, and self-leadership is really valuable. So the goal isn't to really become fearless. It is to work hard. It is becoming harder to be moved emotionally, because the moment that you stop and you're no longer concerned about what people think, you start to actually sound like yourself. And that brings us over to internal validation. We have internal validation and external. And then we have why confidence is connected to the identity, and it's an identity problem. So a lot of people think that confidence comes after proof. And it can when there's evidence. It comes after success, after compliments, after achievement. But if that were true, we would also need to understand that it's the interpretation as well. That's where people get messed up. Because when you get results, if you compare those results to the rest of the world, then you've already have done yourself a disservice. Because you're comparing yourself to the rest of the world, you're using the rest of the world as a measurement, not realizing their journey is not your journey. And you have to have some level of self-acceptance to understand where you are so you can continue and move forward. Now, successful people would never be insecure about it, but yet they are, right? That's the thing, is that they are. And that's because external validation is that cost. And there's a cost to doing and there's a cost to not doing. And external validation and seeking it is literally the hidden cost. That is the price that you pay So the more control you give away and the more you depend on it, the more your confidence starts changing. And it could change this is how you know your confidence is influenced by everybody else. It changes based on the reactions of other people. One good comment, you feel unstoppable. One bad comment, the whole world is going to fall apart and you feel like you're a bad person. You feel like you're no good and you question everything. Self-doubt comes in. One person believes in you. You feel powerful, awesome, right? Great. One person leaves your life. You feel lost. And that isn't confidence. What that is you become dependent. You become dependent on the very idea of external validation. But internal validation is completely different. We don't have to pretend. We don't pretend that opinions don't matter. That's silly. Like, it's not something we pretend that people's opinions don't matter at all. Or like a lot of people just say, oh, fuck their opinion. You know, they just kind of like chalk it up that way. And it means that we start taking our identity and handing it over to other people, almost as if we were renting out an apartment. So you still listen, you still adapt, you still learn, you learn because you're trying to understand yourself. But your entire sense of self doesn't fall apart like a house of cards every single time reality or other people disagree with you. Because people are going to disagree with you and people are not going to like you. And this is where the confidence totally shits the bed and goes downhill. It is not the concept of, I know I'll succeed. Confidence is, I'm going to remain strong on this. I'm going to keep going and I'm going to remain myself no matter what happens. And that's where it is. Confidence is, I'm going to remain myself either way, no matter what goes down. Because your identity impacts your behavior, it changes your behavior. And your actions impact your identity, as long as that interpretation, like we spoke about, that interpretation is used in a certain way. And by the way, it's the interpretation of feedback, it's the interpretation of what things mean to us, right? And you control what things mean to you. So when someone identifies as confident, they take action because every single action that they do take happens to be evidence, as long as they interpret the results properly. Because you could do something, you could try to achieve something, and if you fail at it, if you beat yourself up, you've interpreted those results towards the past, you know, using measurements and metrics of the past. But in actuality, when you fail at something, you have to look for the information in the failure that's going to allow you to persist forward and adjust. It's about persistence and adjustment, constant, persistent, and adjustment. And that is going to be really important. If you're the person that sees the glass always as empty, that's going to be hard. Now, I'm not saying you have to be positive all the time. You should be fair in the way that you evaluate positive and negative things, not just be one-sided or toxic positivity, as people fucking call it, right? There's the word toxic in front of everything today, as we know it. So when you take action, that's beautiful because that action updates your identity, but you have to be able to have that interpretation that if you didn't get the result, what's going to be your persistence? What's going to be your mindset to do it again? And what can you evaluate without harsh judgment? What could you look at scientifically without emotion and be able to use that information to go forward? That's what it's about. Because when you identify as a person that's resilient or emotionally resilient, you recover quickly. And it's not because you just feel different or it's your emotions. It's not that at all. It's because you look at the results and interpret it in a way, or you interpret the discomfort as actually having some level of value in it, you know, to some degree. Now that, of course, would depend on the context of the discomfort, but confidence was nothing to ever create overnight. It wasn't about that. It was never about that. And I think what tends to happen is when we chase the external world and what the external world wants all the time, then we really are negotiating our identity. We're negotiating who we are. Because then everything about us will be based off what everyone else thinks. So you got to remember, every room you walk into will not approve of you. Okay. Being a public speaker in corporate America, I've spoken in front of different crowds. There's tough crowds, there's good crowds, there's hard crowds, and not everybody liked me all the time equally. But what I did do was pay attention to the quality of my message every single time. That was important for me because that's remaining focused on the quality of what I do based on the measurements of what's acceptable in public speaking, not what the audience fucking thinks, okay? Audience is going to think whatever it thinks. You're going to have what, Guru from Guru and, DJ Guru, Guru and Premier from Gang Starr, the rap group Gang Starr, is one of the things he said was, you're aiming for mass appeal. Mass appeal doesn't mean everybody. That's what he talks about. It doesn't mean everybody. You're not going to be liked by everybody. Mass appeal means a high number, a high percentage, but you're going to have naysayers. And if you don't have naysayers, you're not moving in a direction of your fears. You're not going in that avenue. So not every opinion is going to survive, and not every room is going to approve you, and not every story or narrative of you is going to continue. You're going to have good days. You're going to have bad days. The bad times can't stay, and the good times can't stay. That's why you have to be grateful for when things are there. But if you can stay present long enough without caring about how you're being perceived, when you could do that without trying to prove yourself to everyone, you're just focused on the quality of what you're doing. Like me, being focused on public speaking, the quality of what I'm doing, without needing anybody's permission. You'll notice something amazing. You will notice that the confidence really was never missing. It was always there. It was just hiding. It was buried. And we just got used to caring about the audience in the gladiator arena, right? And that's where it becomes a question of like, how do I become more confident? But it's not about how you can become more confident. It's like, what part of you can you actually approve? And what part of you can you actually believe in? When it comes to believing in yourself, it connects to that confidence. As you can see, it goes on from here. Now, David Goggins says something pretty amazing, and, I think he's an awesome guy, and I'm just going to lay it out there. He talks about showing up, like actually showing up, and, showing up is so valuable. It's valuable, and it's quite honestly misunderstood completely, because you could look at showing up as when you do something every single day, that actually reveals who you're becoming. And the reason why is the actions that you actually take are going to be updating your identity like a piece of software. So you have to be able to show up daily and do the work daily, even if you are not ready. Now, of course, this depends on the context of what it is. If you're studying for a test and you feel you're not ready, well, are you second guessing yourself, or did you have somebody actually quiz you? And that's important, have somebody quiz you to see if you could retain the content, right? So you have to test yourself at that point. But there's something that really nobody tells you about confidence. You're not going to hear it from anybody else, okay? You're not going to hear it from all of the gurus out there. You are going to hear it from me. And that confident people don't feel confident all the time. You're going to have shitty days. You're going to have off days. But the thing is, the difference between a confident person is they don't start getting into an emotional tug of war with every single emotion that comes up, because their emotions are like puppet strings. It will guide you. It will pull you. You watch a commercial and you see an ice cream commercial and you give in to that emotion. You go out and buy a whole pint, sit on a couch, binge watch for 6 hours, and then you wonder, why did I gain weight? Meanwhile, your goal is to lose weight and get healthy, but you're not doing that. What you just did was you allowed yourself to become a puppet to your emotions based on what you were fed at that moment. So we have to look for the bigger picture, okay? Because there's a moment that this bigger picture happens in everybody's life. where you realize that waiting is not working. It is not working. It hasn't worked. It's not going to work. And you're going to realize that waiting is not working. Waiting to feel ready, waiting to stop caring in some way, shape, or form, waiting to feel worthy or confident, or waiting to have what you need for it. You are waiting to finally become a person that, and the reason why this fails is because your brain is projecting in the future. Like, if you want the short version, your brain is projecting this concept into the future that is creating delay. So you are projecting into the future that something that creates present day delay. That's what that is. So years will pass and time goes on, and that project on your desk is still there, and that game you wanted to develop is still there, and that one book that you started to write is still there. You haven't even touched it in months. And you notice something inside you, and you're totally uncomfortable about it, right? Is that you never became confident. You were never confident enough like you thought you were. What you did become, and here's the big kicker, what you did become was careful. You became careful, and you were concerned about your impression, and you became impressive for other people because it's based on how you perceive yourself and how you're being perceived by other people. So you thought you were going to be prepared, you thought you were going to be more thoughtful, but you were actually more careful. And it's like, okay, you were being careful. Careful could be good, cautious could be good when it's calculated, but you're going to have to take risks. Studying, like, the biggest thing in my life was actually studying risk mitigation inside business, because it actually is applicable to real life. And that's not for today's discussion, but you could always go dig yourself. You could always go dig for more information on that. But inside, when you're that careful, you become totally tired, totally exhausted. And that's the thing. It takes a lot of energy to be perceived a certain way. It takes a lot of energy to perform. People are going to say whatever they're going to say, and you need to do whatever you're going to do. And you're going to have to consider the value. I consider the value of negative feedback like catching a softball. You catch a softball, but you don't throw it back. You hold on to it, you inspect it, you evaluate it like a scientist. You evaluate it without emotion, and then you throw it where it needs to go. And that's how I treat feedback now more. It took me a long time to do that, but you have to fall. Like in judo, fall 7 times, get up 8. And I'm a believer in that. I'm a big believer in that. So that whole energy of how you're being perceived or how you want people to view you, that takes a lot of energy. But when you're strong and confident inside and you have presence there, that doesn't take much energy at all. It just is. And that's why confidence seems like such an abstract idea. And people are trying to go to all these little gurus out there and be like, all right, what does this person say? What does that person say? And try to compare it up. And you're just getting their version of what they consider based on their life experiences, which is fine and dandy. If it has value, great. If it doesn't, throw it away. Now, when we have to be at a certain place at a certain time, it takes a level of commitment. We have to be committed. We have to have commitment. We have to do commitment before any type of approval. Unless you work in a job where your type of work needs to be approved, quite honestly, in personal life, and I'm speaking in personal life, you yourself need to be that person that approves of you and takes action. And you're taking actions to actually move forward. And the whole point is to move without motivation, because motivation is really a myth. You will pretty much do what your nervous system will allow. So a lot of people think that confidence creates action, but most of the time, action creates confidence, but you still have that interpretation. You still have to interpret your results, bad or good. That's where the big kicker comes in. So you become confident when you do have these stepping stones. You collect evidence. That's why tracking your wins is so valuable. Count your wins or your wins don't count. Problem is, we count our wins and we compare it to the rest of the damn world. And by doing so, when we compare it to the rest of the world, we lose that value because your journey is not anybody else's journey. Like, having compassion for yourself is realizing that your journey is not anybody else's and that no one else is going to walk in your shoes and no one else is going to drink your drink and live in your life. It's you. It's you versus your life. And you need to count your evidence, big or small. And people count the evidence, but they chalk it, oh, that's just luck. Or, well, this person's doing it better. Or, but what about them? Or, but what about them? And that's what they do, is they sit there and they fall into comparison culture. And the evidence that embarrassment didn't kill you, that's valuable. The evidence that, you asked somebody out, you got rejected, and it didn't end your life, you're good. The evidence that all the pain and discomfort is gone. The evidence that you actually survived that situation. That's what it's all about. We have to stop asking, like, what if people judge me? They're going to judge you. They're going to judge you. You're just going to have to make a determination as if there's any value in what they say or absolute fucking garbage. You're going to have to learn the quality of discernment. Discernment is important, which we'll get into. So if people judge you, you're going to start asking that. What if they judge me? But, what happens if they don't? Or what happens if you really measure your own qualities? What happens if you have your own measurement? All right? Confidence isn't deciding your life as being so important that, you need to wait. All right, and one day, without noticing, you walk into the room, and guess what? You have the courage, you speak, you create, you post something online, or maybe you leave. And you realize that you really didn't think about yourself the whole damn time, and that's when you know that you're no longer caring about how you got viewed, but you are understanding the big picture. That confidence was never becoming somebody else. It's not an idea you become. It is a straight up practice. It's a daily practice. And you practice it through action. And confidence will return to who you are. So now that brings us over to discernment. Discernment is the one that nobody's talking about it, okay? If there's a person talking about it, I'd be highly surprised. And matter of fact, if someone is talking about discernment, post that video below. Go ahead and do that. Like, just grab the link and post it below. No problem. Not a big deal. I want you to understand clearly that judgment that you had earlier for yourself, that judgment that you might have, it's important for you that your brain doesn't have to hold court over it all the time. All right? Not every opinion deserves a mental trial. And there's that very strange thing that people do when they get judged. They hold mental court. All right, someone makes a comment, I must be a piece of shit now, right? And suddenly there's a whole trial in your head going down. Exhibit A, Exhibit B, he said this. Opening argument, being defensive, defense statements, cross-examination. You're the judge, jury, but most of all, you become the executioner. You become the executioner and the killer of your own efforts. That's what you're the executioner of. You kill your future efforts. By diving in and believing a lot of that. You become the judge, you become the jury, the defendant, and somehow, some way, the person who judged you already moved on 3 months ago. But you still did an instant replay in your head. That's the first thing to understand. Not every opinion deserves a courtroom. Because judgment feels important, but we often don't understand where it's actually coming from. Importance and how important something is and how accurate that feedback actually is not the same thing. So how do you know if that feedback even matters to begin with? Ask yourself 3 questions. Did this person observe me or did they straight up interpret who you are? There's a difference. Okay? There's a difference. There's also a difference between you interrupted me, that's an observation, versus you're selfish. That's an interpretation. You're selfish. So what one does is really explains the impact from the behavior. The behavior has an impact. And the other one really connects it up to the identity. So behavior is there to teach us, okay? But only if we look. Most of us don't, okay? When we look at our identity, we understand a few things. That people hold an opinion, they hold a judgment, and they hold a label. And we live in a culture now where everybody's got a hashtag, and those hashtags are acting as labels. So we let these labels get slapped onto our identity, and that's where it totally ties you against the wall, makes you feel uncomfortable. And then another question, second question is like, does this feedback actually have value, and does it make me see things in a way that I can understand, or is it just confusing bullshit? That's what I want to share. Because useful feedback, it's going to be uncomfortable. Sometimes it's okay. Like sometimes you can be neutral enough about it, but sometimes it's uncomfortable, but it's so clear that you go back to the drawing board and you start right away. Like I've gotten some feedback on some scripts, and the feedback was, not the best feedback, but man, I went back to my screenplays and hit that ground running, and started hashing out and ironing everything. Now, what I did though was I looked and I asked myself, okay, is this feedback practical or is this feedback opinion? Because there is practical, useful, functional, like stuff that's valuable that you can use, and then there's just opinion. And when you learn to give feedback to other people, that teaches you how to understand what quality feedback is to you. And that's something that I've learned. So that feedback, it can help you. You may not like hearing it. There's a part of you that recognizes it, you know it. And it feels totally, absolute. Sometimes it's exaggerated. Sometimes it's real big. But when people speak in generalizations like you always, you never, you are, you're always doing this, like when they start speaking that way, those are statements that usually tells you more about the lens in which they see you than their actual reality, because every person has their own lens in which they see reality. Would I trade places with this person's thinking? It's a solid question. Would I? Not their success, not their Oscar award, not their thinking, because if someone criticizes your choices, but they live in fear, it tells you a whole lot. If they're looking for approval, if they're looking for, avoidance and pushing it away, then guess what? You might just totally claim and inherit their perspective. That doesn't mean you dismiss people. That's not what I'm saying. There is something much deeper. And people think discernment means deciding who's wrong, but often that's not what it means. What I believe it means is discernment means separating information and just info from your actual identity. And that was by far the most valuable thing that I've ever learned. That was the secret sauce to developing my confidence. Secret sauce. So someone can dislike the way you speak to them, your delivery, but it doesn't mean you're a failure unless you make that meaning and attach it to who you are. Someone can reject your work without rejecting you. Someone could say, I think it needs a little bit of a change here, and they can actually misunderstand you. That's where people will deliberately misunderstand you. So it's all about maturity. Discernment is about maturity. It's not the hard judgment. It's not a sentence. It's not a mental sentence for yourself. It's not defending every single solitary accusation. It's just asking a simple question. What part of this actually is belonging to me? and what part of this belongs to them, and what part of this is info that can help me go back to the creative drawing board and change things versus destroying my identity of who I am. Because you don't have to hand over the keys to your confidence. It's not what you should do. But you do need some freedom. That not every damn opinion deserves a verdict. Let's go deeper and understand the bigger picture. Why do people judge in the first place, right? Well, we are living in a comparison culture. It's to my belief and my study of cyber psychology and working in technology for over 26 years that we have been slowly conditioned through social media to become more judgmental. Now, we can't say all. The moment you say all, we become generalized, and that's not a good idea. So let's go over it. Let me unpack it. So why do they actually judge in the first place, right? Well, first of all, if you've made it this far in my episode, thank you, because this was a long one, and I was deliberately creating a long one for this. I've never had an hour-long one unless I was doing an interview, okay? So people will judge. And it's not because they're evil. It's not always because they're insecure. They are judging, and that is the fastest way that their mind creates a decision. You got to remember what social media is doing is it's creating a mental shortcut. All right? So when we look at something and we only look at it for more than 10 seconds, just think of the people that watch 7,000 videos and each video is only about 10 seconds long, and they're doing a snapshot judgment on every video. So what they're building internally is that inner critic voice. Now, what they don't realize is that inner critic voice becomes their worst enemy. It's destroying themselves. That external lens got developed by the rest of the world, and now it's gone rogue like a secret agent on you. And now it's gone internal. And you won't hear that from anyone else. You will hear that from me. That is what's going on. Okay? And there are people that control their feed. They control their social media feed, and they're very careful and discerning. They discern the quality of information they're actually looking at. They discern how long they're looking at things. So you got to remember, judgment is like a shortcut. It organizes reality quick. It helps people decide fast. Is this safe or is this unsafe? Is this like me? Is this not like me? Is this right? Is this wrong? Does this belong in my life or is this a threat to my identity? That's normal. And people take their problems and they use that same lens. And then they stop seeing the fruitfulness, positive side of things. They start projecting instead of seeing. And projection is real simple. It's something inside them, feels unresolved. So what do? They place it on somewhere else. They place blame on something outside of them. So sometimes people judge confidence because they suppress their own voice. And other people that are confident become a threat to their identity because they've been suppressing their voice. It's like a mirror. The strong puts a spotlight on the weak. And sometimes people judge other people's ambitions because they've abandoned theirs, they've given up. People want other people to fail because it proves that they can't do it. That's where people do it. And people judge vulnerability when you're vulnerable, and don't confuse vulnerability with militaristic vulnerability, because they are two different things. The vulnerability of a tank is completely different than emotional vulnerability. Because the people that judge vulnerability, they do it because they learned that emotions were dangerous and that they were a problem and that they're afraid. So that's what happens. And sometimes they judge because your freedom reminds them of their very fears. But that's what happens. It's a projection. But projection is just one little bit of it. People also judge through their values. Okay, someone values stable income, stable life. They call risk irresponsible, and someone values discipline. They call softness a complete problem. All right? And that's where it gets this opposites. People can see the exact same behavior and just totally exit your life with opposite conclusions. It's not because anyone is lying or telling lies, although there are some people, but because values and judgments act like filters. They act like a lens in which they see you, see your project, and see your reality. And insecurity is misunderstood. That's where it becomes insecurity. Insecure people don't always think less of themselves. Sometimes they think about themselves too much, excessively. How am I being perceived? Where do I rank in this whole squad? What does this mean to me? And then all of a sudden, other people become a mirror. So judgment becomes self-protection at the end of the day. People are a mirror. The very people that judge 99.9% of the time will pretty much judge themselves at 2 a.m. And because that same lens that's external has to go internal. It has to. It must. And I've seen this time and time and time again in many different pieces of psychology and many different people that I've met. So judgment becomes a self-protection. And it's the deepest one because it's connected to expectation. They judge the hardest when expectation exists. The parents, the friends, the coworkers, the partners, the followers, because expectation says, I've already decided who you should be. That's why I said earlier in this episode, people will purposely misunderstand you for that reason. We can't say the world is all harsh. There are good people, but we have to become discerning. We have to be able to discern. And the moment that you change, that's another thing. The moment you change, people feel discomfort. You can see this in couples that are addicted to heroin. Okay? One wants to get clean, and the other one says, no, you have to stay with me. And the other one says, I have to leave. I can't be in this relationship anymore because I don't want this life. I don't want to be an addict anymore. Because there's a whole identity crisis that's going on. So your partner now feels totally uncomfortable because they're going to lose you. They don't have somebody to socially enjoy that addiction with. So it becomes a threat to their identity. They even get angry. Okay, so people feel that discomfort. It's not because it's a wrong thing. It's because it touched on their fear and it became completely unfamiliar. And this is where everything comes from. Confidence, fear, feedback, the identity, the ability to discern. You cannot control who judges you. You cannot control what they project. You cannot control what expectations that they threw at you. But you can learn to ask, is this truth? Or is this perspective? Is this information? Or is this pure bullshit? Or is this interpretation? Or are they interpreting it wrong? Is this a correction? Or is this discomfort? Because the maturity isn't about becoming untouchable like a gangster movie. It's becoming able to listen. And maybe the goal was never getting away from the judgment. It was about becoming strong enough in yourself to remain yourself while other people are going to go about their life. That even that one person that breaks away from the addiction and the partner stays behind in addiction, that one person has to call that relationship quits. It's no longer part of who they are. They've made a decision. They need to move on, and they want a life that's completely different. And they want to get back to who they were. And that's all I'm going to say on today's episode. I hope you enjoyed this. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And have a great day. And don't forget to check out some of my other videos. Take care.